All right, now there's our normal sort of creation research with our website there. Can I encourage you? In fact, why aren't I moving, Sam?
You need to bring your own slides up, John. You need to go down to
Okay,
PowerPoint and bring
there
your
we
own
are.
slides up.
All right, there we are.
Here we go.
Diane already took you to Australia, and Craig is in Australia. There's our creationresearch.net logo at over the Jurassic Ark site. I was here yesterday, really thrilled because a group of people had caught a plane from Sydney, Australia at 3 a.m. in the morning to get there on time for our Jurassic Ark Day. And we had lots of families, but this has been the most enthusiastic one I've seen for a while. And we've dug up fossil trees. You'll notice no roots, no branches, and we make a big thing of maps. I've already mentioned a Bible verse out of 2 Timothy where Paul wrote to young Timothy and said, study to show yourself approved. Study. Just the word of God, study the works of God as well. Study all those things that give him the glory. And can I encourage you? Just like we've got here, a map of Jurassic Ark, record what you do. Your memory might fail. I tell you what, 2005, we started digging. 2006, 2007, we dug more. We excavated. Yes, the log deposit, well, no, not the deposit, but bits of petrified wood were found when they put that big dam into the side there. And we finally figured out they must be coming from somewhere. So as we excavated, and we got volunteers in to do it. Thank you, volunteers. You are wonderful blessings to us. And they helped discover that these trees that are here are actually regarded as 150 million years old, but they can't be. You see, they have no roots and no branches. So they didn't grow there. And you'll see at the top right-hand side, there's not only one of our volunteers, there's a rock. So broken roots, no roots at all on that one. In fact, by the time you take the aerial view, you'll see a log at right angles at the top, the log that's coming down towards the bottom left-hand corner, and a large rock. Now, trees float, rocks don't. So if you argue that the tree grew there, you're missing the roots. If you argue it was washed in, you have to have it washed in at the same time as the rocks were. But trees actually get washed in much easier than rocks do. Boulders with trees. Study to show yourself approved. Search out the truth. I mean, even the Old Testament is full of seek me with your whole heart. It's full of study to show yourself approved. It's full of choose this day. Well, you come to Jurassic Ark and you'll see the area has got boulders in it. We collected one of every sort of different boulder we could find to analyze where they came from. And the biggest boulders were up to 1/2 meter across. Now, that's a fairly heavy rock, which means fast water. And yes, we have evidence beyond a shadow of a doubt as to where these rocks came from, up to several hundred kilometers away, mixed with smashed logs. Well, there's one of our helpers. He's still a helper, which is great. And we've just finished exposing that tree, which has got no roots. It's got a big root ball. It's got some broken off bits of roots, but the roots have been ripped out. Now, I say that because, you see, when you look at fossil forests discovered at Gilboa and all of that, and we got Craig deliberately to give you a definition of forest, none of the present day definitions actually apply to geology, because in geology, your trees are preserved. Your tree canopies aren't. Your trees, how do you define a fossil forest? Well, we've called this one a fossil flood logjam, and yet the ordinary textbook calls it a fossil forest, but not one tree grew here. In fact, you'll read papers and they argue about the space between the trees, the percentage of this plant, that plant, and everything else. Well, we call it a flood jam, a log jam, because there is one. We had a mega flood, and can you see the trees stacked up against the bridge? Well, you can actually work out which way the current was coming, A, because the river's still there, but B, even though the trees are junked in everywhere, the bigger trees give it away. You see, when you look at this landslide log jam, it came off the mountain at the back. I took that picture in British Columbia because we were interested in dealing with the real world. What do log jams look like? Well, I followed those trees, and yes, down at the mouth of the river there on the British Columbia coast, you will find that's the trees. That's the ones that have made it. And they've rubbed up against each other, their bark is gone, and their points, well, they're rounded. They've rolled over and over. They get to be pointed, just like our fossil trees. This tree didn't grow there. This tree has neither branches or roots. This tree was not only pulled down, flooded along, but turned round and round. Most of them were. In fact, as Diane said, we can easily see what sort of tree they are because they're southern conifers. And there's, well, as Diane said, we had an underground radar survey, and there's at least 10,000 fossil trees just on our little bit of exposure at Gympie. And they're southern conifers, they still grow, hence after its own kind is the theme. That's why we can have a living fossil forest, and we can also cover it up. Thank you to our supporters who've enabled us to get enough funds so that we don't kill our supporters who come to help dig with skin cancer. Big problem in Australia. Wonderful to be able to do it under shelter. Yeah, there's my old bommy station wagon up the back there. And you see me luxuriously excavating here? Great stuff. There's the full cover. No, not quite the full cover, because it's actually quite large. In fact, one of the things we do when we tell you to study to show yourself approved, we actually measure things against that which is true. Which way does the shed go? Well, you'll see where north is. See on the compass on the right? I did this yesterday just deliberately for you. So you can see north. I'll tell you what, don't compasses on cameras, aren't they great? I mean, you get your iPhone, it's got a camera on it to download the right app. And our shed actually is facing basically northeast. And you'll see north over to the left there. And we're at 50 meters altitude. I can't even tell you how high I am. This is wonderful. And then when we start turning around and measuring the trees, well, you can see where north is there. And you can see the trees where you can start to measure, because you see the compass was pointed along that longest tree. So the longest tree in that picture was pointing dead north. And there's a tree that's parallel to the shed, almost parallel. And so these are the sort of things we have to do to actually record and prove that these trees were washed in. They were a forest, but not here. They grew somewhere else. They were ripped up and they were carried along, dumped and buried before they went rotten. And that's important because being pine trees, they rot pretty fast. In fact, by the time we've excavated here we've been excavating for decades now, logs float, rocks don't. I mean, this is so obvious to the kids once you point it out, because I'll be honest, it's not obvious to almost everybody until it does get pointed out. They'll go to Arizona, a fossil forest. No, it wasn't. None of those trees grew there. That's why they're all flood oriented. None of those trees grew where you see them in Arizona. And the clue is they're exactly the same sort of trees as we have at Jurassic Ark. Their roots have been ripped off. They grew somewhere else. In fact, some of them grew somewhere else with beehives in Arizona, because you find petrified beehives in them. Rapid burial. Same as in Australia. Look at that one. Beautifully preserved. So we've done a lot of work, not only to excavate. Yes, it does my muscles a whole world of good and a heaven of good to my heart to see that we can prove these trees were not just growing somewhere else, but some of them have been pushed in and pushed up against something. So the log has bent and snapped. Now, have you ever tried to do that to a tree? Just push it over till it snaps. You'll find that when the tree is waterlogged, it bends much quicker. Oh, it will still snap if you put enough pressure on it. See, there's the snap. We know that tree snapped off. There was no tree further down the bottom right-hand side. That tree has bent and finally caved in. Well, when you have a look at these trees, there's a whole mixture of trees and rocks, and it's interesting. Mostly Oricaria. We found some Oricaria pine nuts here. We've got all sorts of interesting bits and pieces of, well, do you see my fingers there? Do you see what we like to call of as our dinosaur fingers? It's actually a couple of branches side by side, but can you see them mixed in with the rocks? The rocks and the trees were all coming in here at once. Logs float, rocks don't. Now, the size of the rocks gives you a good clue as to what the velocity was. And the biggest rock we've found here is at least 1/2 meter across, and we still haven't been able to dig it out of the ground. It's not part of the underground, the underlying strata, because they're not made of the same rock. This was a place of violence. Logs float, rocks don't. Current velocity indicators. Do you see there's another log which has come up against a rock which has stopped and snapped? So these logs were, well, pushed in. Violence, water, chaos. But there is an orientation. Remember the bridge I showed you at the start? You can take the biggest logs and get an idea of which way currents were going. Now, can I encourage you to support what we do? Thank you. The other week, somebody took up my challenge I made in jest and was the first person to donate $100 or £100. So if you want to do that again, maybe even 200, that'd be wonderful. We'll have a competition, hey? But our research does need your support. And I'd encourage you to watch. It's not just at Jurassic Ark. There's on the map of Queensland Jurassic Ark. There's Brisbane, where the people from Sydney, 600 kilometres, or 600 miles rather, 1,000 kilometres further south, flew into. There's a geological map showing our log jam site. When you have a look at it, we call it the Myrtle Creek Sandstone, because guess which creek runs through the middle of it? You're right, Myrtle Creek. That's how we name these things. Why is it called Jurassic? Because the same trees are found in the Jura Mountain deposits. We have Araucaria, southern pines, that still grow in Australia. They have southern pines over there, but they no longer grow in Germany, not naturally anyway. Then you go from Jurassic Ark down to Caloundra, which is about 70 miles or 110 kilometres. There's one of our field trips there. You can only do this one at low tide. And look, there's an exposed tree. But have you noticed something? It's not just the rocks that get eroded, the trees do too. You see, the roots are gone, the tree has been rounded, that tree has travelled a fair distance because the water and the grains that it's with have actually polished the tree and rubbed it off. So it's not just talking about trees that fell down on the side of a creek and fell in and got buried. No, these have travelled quite a significant distance. The roots have been ripped off. There's one of my favourite ones because it's got coal on one end, it's got bare silica at the other, and it's surrounded by pulverising rocks. And we've often shared the size of our bed. And yes, I've been over much of that log bed. And there are gazillions of fossil trees, not whole trees, just portions, sometimes with root bases attached, but you find enough of the roots and they have been broken off. Same as you do at Mount St. Helens, and same as you do in all the so-called ginkgo forests or the Jurassic reed beds that they are finding in Pennsylvania, rather. The roots ultimately you'll find are broken off or they're squashed. There's one of my nice ones. That's from over near the edge of the Darling Downs. That's an Araucaria as well. Notice it's flattened. Now you can contact Vance Nelson and find out how many tons of pressure it takes to squash a tree. Sorry, it doesn't work if the tree is dry because it will just shatter. So we know these trees were waterlogged, they were in a flood, and the sediment is dumped so quickly on the top. A, that's why they're preserved. B, it's why they're squashed. Size of the beds, in case you haven't got it yet, there's the whole of the United Kingdom. I drove from Cornwall right up to John O'Groats in the top. It didn't take me 1,000,000 years. It didn't take me 100 years. It didn't take me 3 days. Oh, I drove Joseph from Brisbane out to Melbourne. It took me a few days. But in the UK, tiny place. There's the Jurassic bed on east coast of Australia. These are big log deposits. There it is when you get even bigger. Do you see the red arrow? That's where Jurassic Ark is. Do you see all the dark grey? That's where the Jurassic rock full of logs are, all over. Even in Australia, these are mega beds. Now you can see why we call it a fossil flood log jam. Now you can see why we ask for your prayer and your support. And we do want to thank all of you today who've encouraged Sam in that way. And we do want to give credit to all the people who've been involved. As I shared with Diane before, she actually gave and credit, and done some marvelous murals for us. But the two she picked today were actually done by our local artist, Steve Cardino's wife. So thank you to all of you who've supported what we've done. And here's the end point. People look at fossil forests and think it took millions of years to bury it. It took 100 years for it to grow. And they add up all the lifespans of the dead things just to find out how long that layer took to get there. Sorry, if they're washed in, the layer didn't take time, it took a process. Watch out for false science. If you think the rocks took vast ages to get there, they will deliberately lead you astray in the same way as Charles Lyell led Charles Darwin astray. My aim is to get rid of Moses out of science. You get rid of Moses, you get rid of Genesis, you get rid of God. And those of you who are Christians who want God to make the world millions of years ago, I'll leave you with one thought. The older you make the world, the smaller your God gets till you push him right out the window. You have a Jesus who can not only heal sick men, who can not only make blind men see, he can actually create the world, and he used 6 days, but he didn't even need them. Watch out for false science. It will lead you astray. Well, you've heard me say this before, just before our last question time. There are many theories and opinions that contradict everything in the Bible, but the facts never do. Can I encourage you? Pick up your Bible when we're done and read that verse. I'm not going to tell you what it says. Look it up yourself. You can do that.